This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
After their first tentative encounters with each other, Laura and Almanzo sometimes did not see each other for months at a time. He worked hard all spring on his homestead and timber claims, but in May he started coming around again to take her riding in the country in his new buggy. The horses he drove were beautiful Morgans, and Laura looked forward every Sunday afternoon to seeing them swing around Pearson's livery barn on the south end of town and across the big slough to pick her up. Almanzo would drive her to Lake Henry and Lake Thompson, or up to Spirit Lake, stopping along the way to pick prairie wildflowers. By the end of the afternoon they had sometimes gone 40 miles or more. Several times Almanzo dropped by on the way to Laura's at a farmstead to pick up Stella Gilbert, whose mother was bedridden. He told Laura that Stella worked so hard to take care of her mother and to keep the place going that she deserved to have a little fun. Laura did not object for a while, but after several weeks she told Almanzo that he would have to decide. It was either Stella or Laura. If he wanted to drive Stella around with them, Laura would not be going along any more. The next Sunday he showed up at the Ingalls house alone, and that was the end of the threesome driving around the countryside. July arrived, and Almanzo bought a new pair of spirited horses that he planned to train and sell at a profit. Their names were Barnum and Skip. Now, when he came by to pick her up for their weekly rides, Laura had to be ready to jump into the buggy as soon as he drove up, because the horses were hard to control. Soon, however, even she was taking the reins. Now their rides sometimes extended to 50 or even 60 miles. The two decided to participate in a singing school held on Friday evenings in the Congregational Church. These schools were organized less for the purpose of learning how to sing than for entertainment and for the financial benefit of the teachers who charged their students. Most of the participants were young couples, and the classes might just as well have been called sparking schools. One evening after a Ladies' Aid ice cream social at the church, Almanzo drove Laura into the country and proposed to her. In typical fashion, his approach was indirect, as he asked her if she wanted an engagement ring. That evening, assuming her description in her autobiography is correct, they kissed for the first time. "Aren't you going to kiss me good night?" she supposedly asked him when he dropped her off at her house. "I was afraid you wouldn't like it," he replied. This story reveals something important about their relationship, its formality and decorum, and his deference to her wishes. Although she was only 17 and he was 27, she clearly already was emerging as the dominant partner. When school reopened in September, a new 2-story schoolhouse was ready for the growing student population. Laura and Carrie and the older students were taught upstairs by Mr. Owen, while the younger ones were downstairs with a new teacher, Gussie Masters, the older sister of Laura's nemesis, Genevieve. Laura's seatmate, Ida Brown, now brandished an engagement ring too, her beau being Elmer McConnell, a young farmer who had worked for Ida's father that summer. Despite her engagement, Laura was still a schoolgirl. Her girlish inclinations were in evidence one afternoon when she, along with many of her schoolmates, skipped classes to try the new roller skating rink. When they were all called to account the next morning, Mr. Owen expressed surprise at his prized pupil's action, commenting, "You usually set a good example, Laura." In November, Almanzo and Royal decided to head south to attend the World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition in New Orleans, and then to visit their parents in Spring Valley before coming back to De Smet. Almanzo was going to enjoy one last fling as a bachelor before settling down to married life. Laura did not expect the brothers' return until spring, but just before Christmas, Almanzo showed up at their doorstep. He and Royal had decided not to go to New Orleans after all, but had traveled through Nebraska and Iowa, taking in the sights on their way to Minnesota. Now in the evenings, Laura and Almanzo sat up late making plans and talking about their new life together.